Chapter 1. The comfort of control. Leon Murdock liked mornings because they never asked him questions. They arrived on schedule, performed as expected, and ended without complication. At precisely 6:30 a.m., his alarm chimed, a neutral sound, intentionally selected after extensive testing. No melody, no emotional resonance. Just information. Time to wake up. Leon swung his legs off the bed and sat for exactly 5 seconds before standing. He didn't rush. He didn't linger. He followed the same sequence he'd refined over the past 3 years, since moving into the one-bedroom apartment overlooking a side street that was quiet enough to be forgettable. Shower, coffee, toast, news headlines, not the opinion pieces, weather forecast, email triage. The predictability soothed him. By 7:45, Leon was dressed in dark slacks and a pale blue button-down, jacket folded neatly over his arm. He checked his reflection, not for vanity but verification. Everything aligned. No anomalies detected. The elevator ride down was uneventful. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and someone else's perfume. Leon nodded to the doorman, who nodded back. They had never exchanged names and never would. It was a perfect relationship. Outside, the city was already awake. Not aggressively so. More like it had opened one eye and decided coffee would come later. Leon walked the 3 blocks to the train station, earbuds in but no music playing. He liked the illusion of isolation without sacrificing awareness. A woman nearly collided with him while texting. A man argued loudly with someone who wasn't there. A busker tuned his guitar without committing to a song. Patterns everywhere if you knew how to look. Leon worked as a business analytics consultant for a mid-sized firm that specialized in translating chaos into clarity. Companies brought him messy datasets and vague questions, and Leon delivered actionable insights. It was deeply satisfying work. People were emotional. Data was not. At least that was the theory. By mid-morning, Leon had already resolved a forecasting discrepancy that had baffled a client for weeks. The solution was simple. Once you stripped away assumptions and focused on what the numbers actually said. His manager stopped by his desk just before lunch. "Nice work on the Grayson account," she said. "You free tonight?" Leon frowned slightly. "Free in what sense?" She smiled. "Team happy hour. 6 o'clock. Leon calculated quickly. He had no conflicting obligations. Declining without reason would invite questions. Attendance once every few months maintained social equilibrium. "I can make an appearance," he said. "That's the spirit." She walked away satisfied. Leon returned to his screen. Lunch was a salad from the cafe downstairs. He ate at his desk, reading an article about declining marriage rates among millennials. The headline framed it as a crisis. Leon disagreed. Marriage was an inefficient construct with an outdated risk profile. He'd seen it firsthand growing up. Friends' parents quietly resenting one another. Relatives enduring relationships that had long since expired because disentanglement was expensive and humiliating. You could have companionship without contracts. Intimacy without legal exposure. Stability without ceremony. Leon had dated, of course. High school had offered earnest intensity. College had provided variety and expiration dates. His professional life included the occasional app-based dinner that ended with polite handshakes or mutual ghosting. None of it bothered him. He wasn't lonely. At 6 o'clock sharp, Leon stood at the bar with a beer he hadn't chosen and colleagues he tolerated well enough. The conversation was harmless, office gossip, mild complaints, someone's dog. Leon smiled at the appropriate intervals. At 6:42 he checked his watch. He'd been present long enough. "I'm heading out," he said to no one in particular. A chorus of goodbyes followed him to the door. Outside, dusk softened the city's edges. Leon considered going straight home, but the evening was warm and unremarkable in a pleasant way. He walked instead, cutting through streets he usually ignored. That's when he noticed the bookstore. It wasn't new. That was the strange part. It had clearly been there for years. Narrow, slightly crooked sign, windows cluttered with handwritten notes and sun-faded paperbacks. Leon had simply never had a reason to see it before. Impulse was not one of Leon's habits, yet his steps slowed. He told himself it was curiosity, environmental awareness, data gathering. Inside, the shop smelled like dust and ink and something citrusy. The aisles were tight, the shelves mismatched. A bell chimed softly behind him. "Hi," someone said. "Let me know if you need help finding anything." Leon turned. The woman behind the counter wasn't what he'd expected, though he couldn't have said what he'd been expecting. She had dark hair pulled into a loose knot and wore a cardigan that looked aggressively comfortable. She was smiling, but not in a practiced way. "Just browsing," Leon said. "Best way to do it," she replied. Leon drifted through the aisles, fingers brushing spines without intention. He told himself he'd leave in 5 minutes. 10 minutes later, he was still there. "You're alphabetizing fiction by first name," he said before he could stop himself. The woman looked up. "I am. That's unconventional." She grinned. "So are most people." Last names felt dishonest. Leon blinked. "Dishonest how?" She shrugged. "Authors are people before their brands." Leon considered that. "I've never heard it framed that way. Most people haven't." she said. That's okay. There was a pause, not awkward but expectant. I'm Leon, he said finally, unsure why he felt compelled to supply the information. Mara, she replied. Welcome to my beautifully impractical bookstore. Leon nodded slowly. He was still nodding when he realized something had shifted. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious. Just a subtle deviation from expectation. An anomaly. And Leon, for the first time in a long while, didn't immediately correct it. Chapter 2. Anomaly detected. Leon did not buy a book. This fact irritated him more than it should have. He stood in the narrow aisle pretending to examine a paperback he had no intention of reading, acutely aware that Mara had returned to her place behind the counter. She was writing something in a ledger. Pen scratching softly, deliberate but unhurried. The sound threaded through the shop, oddly grounding. Leon checked his watch. He had already exceeded the 5-minute limit he'd mentally assigned to this detour. There was no rational justification for staying longer. And yet, you organize nonfiction differently, he said, gesturing toward the back shelves. Mara glanced up. By topic, but not alphabetically. She capped her pen. Correct. Why? Because someone looking for a book about grief doesn't want to browse next to books about optimizing productivity. Leon considered that. That's considerate. She smiled faintly. I try. Another pause settled between them. It wasn't empty. Leon noticed that too. You don't strike me as someone who browses aimlessly, Mara said. I'm not, Leon replied. I usually come in with a goal. And today, Leon hesitated. Today was observational. Her eyebrow lifted. That sounds suspiciously like a justification. Leon exhaled through his nose. You may be right. She laughed then, not loudly, not performatively. Just a brief, genuine sound. It landed somewhere unexpected in Leon's chest. He shifted his weight. How long has this place been here? Longer than I have, Mara said. I took it over from the previous owner 5 years ago. That's a risk, Leon said before thinking. Is it? She asked, unoffended. Independent bookstores have been declining steadily for over a decade, he said. Margins are thin. Competition is brutal, she finished. Yes, I know. Leon stopped himself. Sorry. Occupational hazard. She tilted her head. Let me guess. Finance. Analytics. Ah, she said. So you quantify uncertainty for a living. I reduce it, Leon corrected. Mara smiled. Same thing, different branding. Leon found himself smiling back, which annoyed him even more than not buying a book. I should go, he said. Of course, she replied easily. No disappointment, no pressure. Leon moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. What's the ledger for? He asked. Mara looked down at it. Customer requests. People ask for books I don't have or ones they loved and can't remember the title of. I track patterns. Patterns, Leon echoed. Turns out, people are more predictable than they think, she said. Leon opened the door, the bell chiming softly as evening air slipped inside. He stepped out, then stopped again. I'm Leon, he said, repeating it as if it might settle something. I remember, Mara replied. Leon the observer. He nodded once, then left before he could overanalyze the exit. Leon walked home with the uncomfortable awareness that his internal state had changed. He replayed the conversation not obsessively but methodically. There was nothing flirtatious, no overt invitation, no exchange of numbers, no unresolved tension that demanded immediate action. And yet, his apartment felt smaller than usual when he arrived. The silence, normally a relief, pressed in on him. He set his jacket down more forcefully than necessary and opened his laptop, intending to review a model he'd been refining. Instead, he stared at a blank screen. This was inefficient. Leon closed the laptop and made dinner. Pasta precisely timed. He ate at the counter, phone face down. He didn't turn on the television. His mind drifted, unbidden, back to the bookstore, to the way Mara had spoken without rushing, to her refusal to justify herself beyond what felt necessary. She hadn't tried to impress him. That, Leon realized, was the anomaly. The next morning, Leon passed the bookstore on his way to work. He did not go inside. He told himself this was restraint. At lunch, he walked a different route. At 6 o'clock, he stood in front of his building, debating whether hunger or curiosity was the stronger motivator. Hunger won. Barely. He cooked, ate, cleaned. The evening stretched, unclaimed. At 8:17 p.m., Leon put on his jacket. He didn't label the decision. He simply acted. The bookstore lights were still on when he arrived. Inside, Mara was sitting on the floor behind the counter, surrounded by open boxes. She looked up. Back already? Leon cleared his throat. I realized I failed to complete the interaction. She smiled slowly. Did you now? I didn't buy a book, he said. That's poor form. Only if you intended to, she replied. I do now. Mara stood, brushing dust from her hands. What are you looking for? Leon paused. He hadn't planned this part. Something unfamiliar, he said finally. but not aimless. Her smile sharpened with interest. I can work with that. She led him to a shelf he hadn't noticed before. As Leon reached for a book she indicated, he felt it again. That subtle shift, the sense of deviation from expectation. This time he didn't resist it, and that, more than anything else, unsettled him. Chapter 3. False positives. Leon told himself the second visit to the bookstore had been corrective. He'd failed to complete a social transaction the first time, entered a retail environment, engaged the proprietor, exited without purchasing merchandise. The return visit resolved that imbalance. That was all. The explanation held for approximately 12 hours. By the following afternoon, Leon found himself standing at his office window, staring at the faint reflection of his own face in the glass. The book Mara had recommended sitting unopened in his bag. He hadn't read a single page. That bothered him too. You okay? Asked Nate from the neighboring desk. Leon turned. Yes. Nate squinted. That sounded pre-programmed. It usually is, Leon said. Nate leaned against the divider. You've been distracted. Leon frowned. Define distracted. Less focused. More staring into middle distance. You also declined lunch. I wasn't hungry. You're always hungry, Nate said. That's how I know you're human. Leon returned his attention to the spreadsheet on his screen. Correlation does not imply causation. Nate grinned. Something happened. Nothing happened. Aha. Leon let the conversation die there, which was easy. Nate thrived on mild curiosity, not persistence. Still, the observation lingered. At 5:58 p.m., Leon shut down his computer. He'd completed everything on his task list. No loose ends. No unresolved variables. He did not go to the bookstore. That, he decided, was proof of restraint. On Thursday, Leon read 3 pages of the book on his commute before realizing he'd absorbed none of it. The prose was competent. The pacing was fine. Under normal circumstances, he would have continued. Instead, his attention kept circling back to the memory of Mara crouched on the floor behind the counter, dust on her hands, entirely unbothered by the disorder around her. Unbothered by disorder. That was the first time the thought unsettled him. During lunch, Leon sat in the small park near his office, scrolling absently through an article about behavioral economics. The irony wasn't lost on him. People made decisions emotionally and justified them rationally afterward. That was the prevailing theory. Leon had always believed himself exempt. At 6:31 p.m., Leon stood outside the bookstore again. He stared at the window, at the handwritten sign that read closed early for inventory. The lights inside were dim, the door locked. A surprising wave of disappointment hit him, brief but unmistakable. Leon stepped back, annoyed with himself. This was a false positive, he decided. A misread signal. He'd projected meaning onto a neutral interaction because it deviated from routine. That didn't make it significant. He walked home. Saturday morning arrived with no obligations. Leon cleaned his apartment, reorganized his bookshelf by genre and author last name, and finally read the book Mara had sold him. It was nothing like what he usually chose. The characters were impulsive. The structure was loose. The ending ambiguous. Leon finished it in one sitting. At 3:12 p.m. he stood, grabbed his jacket, and left without announcing the decision to himself. The bookstore was open. Mara was behind the counter, reading. She looked up when the bell chimed. Leon, she said, as if she'd been expecting him but hadn't assumed. You were closed early yesterday, he said. Inventory casualty, she replied. Books breed when no one's looking. Leon held up the paperback. I finished this. Her expression shifted, not dramatically, but with interest. And I didn't agree with the ending. Mara smiled. Good. That seems counterintuitive. Only if you think books exist to affirm, she said. Leon nodded slowly. I suppose discomfort indicates engagement. Exactly. He hesitated. Do you often recommend books people won't like? All the time, she said. If they're open to it. Leon considered that. That's inefficient. Mara laughed. You say that like it's a flaw. It is, Leon replied, then paused. Objectively. She leaned forward slightly. Objectively according to whom? Leon opened his mouth, then closed it. Touché, he said. Mara studied him for a moment. You analyze for a living, don't you? Yes. And you're trying very hard not to analyze this, she said, gesturing vaguely between them. Leon didn't deny it. I don't see the value. Mara tilted her head. Not everything needs to be optimized. That's a dangerous philosophy. Only if you're afraid of variance. Leon felt something shift again, stronger this time. I don't gamble, he said. I don't either, Mara replied. I just acknowledge uncertainty exists whether we engage with it or not. Silence stretched between them, charged but not heavy. Coffee? She asked suddenly. There's a place next door. I could close for 15 minutes. Leon's instinct was to decline, to reassert control, to reduce exposure. Instead, he said, 15 minutes is reasonable. Mara smiled. I'll grab my coat. As they stepped outside together, Leon felt the unfamiliar sensation of moving without a model. No forecast. No mitigation strategy. Just forward motion. And for the first time, he wasn't entirely convinced that was a mistake. Chapter 4. The cost of assumptions. The coffee shop next door was narrow and loud in a way that felt intentional, as if the noise were meant to hurry people along. Steam hissed from behind the counter. Cups clinked. Someone laughed too loudly at something that hadn't earned it. Leon stood slightly too close to the menu, scanning options he already understood. "Do you always approach coffee like it's a strategic decision?" Mara asked, folding her arms as she watched him. Leon glanced at her. "Caffeine content varies widely. So does quality. It seems irresponsible not to consider both." She smiled. "I'll translate that as yes." They ordered black coffee for Leon, something with oat milk and cinnamon for Mara, and claimed a small table by the window. Leon sat with his back straight, hands folded loosely around his cup. "This place is chaotic," he observed. Mara looked around. "It's alive." "That's one interpretation." She took a sip, unfazed. "So, analytics." Leon nodded. "Bookstores." "Touché." Another pause. This one felt different, less tentative, more evaluative. "You analyze people too, don't you?" Mara asked. Leon hesitated. "Not intentionally. But you do." "Yes," he admitted. "Patterns are difficult to ignore." "And what pattern am I fitting into?" she asked lightly. Leon's instinct was to deflect. Instead, he answered honestly. "You're an outlier," he said. Mara laughed. "That sounds either flattering or concerning." "Statistically, it's neutral," Leon said. "Context dependent." She leaned back in her chair. "Tell me something, Leon. When you say outlier, do you mean interesting or inconvenient?" Leon considered. "Both." Mara nodded slowly. "Fair." They sat in silence for a moment, watching people pass by the window, couples, groups, a man walking his dog far too close to traffic. "You don't wear a ring," Mara said suddenly. Leon blinked. "No." "Ever married?" "No." "Serious relationships?" "Yes," Leon said. "At different stages of life. But not now." "Correct." Mara smiled faintly. "Let me guess. You're not opposed to the idea of marriage. You just don't see the upside." Leon's eyebrows lifted slightly. "That's accurate." "I've met your type," she said. Leon bristled. "I'm not sure I appreciate being categorized." She shrugged. "You do it too." He couldn't deny that. "What's your conclusion?" he asked. "That you've decided the risk outweighs the reward," Mara said. "That you can get everything marriage promises without the legal and emotional fallout when it fails." Leon stared at her. "Have you been spying on me?" She laughed. "No. You're just not as unique as you think." That should have annoyed him. Instead, it intrigued him. "And you?" Leon asked. "What's your conclusion?" Mara's smile softened, then faded entirely. "I don't believe in staying," she said. Leon frowned. "Staying? When things get hard," she clarified. "When people change. When the version you fell for isn't the one you wake up next to anymore." "That sounds like a self-fulfilling prophecy," Leon said. "Or a learned response." He studied her more carefully now, noticing the way her fingers tightened slightly around her cup. "You've been married," he said. Mara shook her head. "No. But I've watched people stay when they shouldn't," she said. "And leave when they should have stayed. I've seen what commitment does when it's driven by fear instead of choice." Leon nodded slowly. "Fear skews outcomes." "Exactly." Another silence, heavier this time. "So," Leon said carefully, "you don't believe in permanence." Mara met his gaze. "I believe in honesty. And momentum. Permanence is a promise people make before they understand the cost." Leon absorbed that. "I don't make promises lightly," he said. "I can tell," Mara replied. They finished their coffee without rushing. When they stood to leave, neither mentioned time. Outside, the evening had cooled. The streetlights flickered on one by one. "This was nice," Mara said. "Unexpected, but nice." Leon nodded. "Agreed." She hesitated, then added, "Just so we're clear, I'm not looking for anything." Leon felt a familiar sense of relief, quickly followed by something else. "Neither am I," he said. They exchanged a look that acknowledged the lie without calling it out. Mara smiled, small but sincere. "Good." She turned back toward the bookstore. Leon watched her go, aware of the strange tension settling in his chest. He hadn't misread her, but he had assumed alignment where none existed. And for the first time, Leon wondered what the cost of that assumption might be. Chapter 5, Regression Analysis. Leon stopped going to the bookstore. Not dramatically, not pointedly. He didn't make a declaration to himself or mark a date on the calendar. He simply didn't go. The absence felt deliberate anyway. He told himself it was about clarity, about not introducing unnecessary variables into an already efficient system. Mara had been explicit. She wasn't looking for anything. Neither was he. There was no problem to solve, no outcome to optimize, which meant continuing would be indulgent. Leon returned to routine with the quiet determination of someone correcting a deviation. He arrived early. He left on time. He ate lunches that could be prepared in under 10 minutes and dinners that required no decision-making. He told himself this was balance being restored. The lie held until Tuesday. That was when his manager asked, casually, "Everything okay with you lately?" "Yes," Leon said automatically. She didn't argue. She just nodded, the way people did when they didn't believe you but didn't want to press. That afternoon, Leon found an error in a dataset he'd reviewed twice already. It was small, but it shouldn't have happened. He stared at the screen longer than necessary. This, he decided, was inefficiency. On Thursday evening, Leon received a text from his sister. "Mom wants to know if you're coming home this month." Leon sighed and typed back, "Busy. Maybe next." "You always say that," she replied. Leon stared at the message, then locked his phone without responding. Later, while brushing his teeth, his mind drifted, unhelpfully, to the way Mara had said permanence was a promise people made before understanding the cost. He shut off the light harder than necessary. The following Saturday, Leon found himself standing outside the bookstore without remembering the walk there. That disturbed him. He didn't go in. Instead, he crossed the street and kept walking until the storefront disappeared behind him. His pace quickened, then slowed again once he'd put sufficient distance between himself and the impulse. This was what discipline felt like, he told himself. It felt worse than curiosity. Mara noticed his absence on day 3. She hadn't expected him back immediately. Leon didn't strike her as impulsive. If anything, he seemed like the type who needed to process before repeating an experience. But by the end of the week, the pattern registered. People disappeared from her life all the time. That wasn't unusual. Most drifted. Some left abruptly. A few made grand announcements on the way out, as if that might make the absence matter more. Leon did none of those things. He simply stopped. Mara told herself she didn't care. That she'd read him correctly from the start. Careful, controlled, allergic to mess. Still, when the bell chimed late one afternoon and her heart lifted reflexively before dropping again, she scowled at herself and returned to shelving. Assumptions, she reminded herself, were expensive. The misunderstanding arrived quietly, as most consequential things did. Leon was reviewing quarterly projections when he overheard 2 colleagues talking behind him. "You know that bookstore on Linden?" one asked. "The one with the weird shelving?" the other replied. "Yeah. Apparently the owner's dating some guy from out of town. Comes in after hours." Leon's fingers stilled on the keyboard. "That so?" the second voice said. "Good for her." Leon didn't turn around. He didn't ask questions. He didn't interrupt. He let the information settle into place with the ease of something that confirmed an existing model. Of course, he thought. He closed the file and shut down his computer early. That night, Leon sat alone in his apartment. The book Mara had sold him resting on the coffee table like an accusation. He picked it up, flipped to a random page and read a paragraph he vaguely remembered disliking. This time it felt different. He exhaled slowly. The problem, Leon realized, wasn't that Mara didn't want permanence. It was that he'd assumed that meant alignment with his own philosophy. He'd mistaken shared skepticism for shared intent. That was an analytical error. And like most errors, it had consequences. Leon stared out the window at the city lights, the familiar hum of certainty notably absent. For the first time, the idea that he might have miscalculated didn't just irritate him. It unsettled him. And that was when Leon understood the most uncomfortable truth of all. Avoiding risk hadn't protected him. It had only delayed the cost. Chapter 6. Outliers. Leon drove out of the city before sunrise on Sunday. He hadn't planned to. The decision surfaced sometime after midnight, fully formed and quietly insistent, the way conclusions did when he stopped arguing with them. By the time he packed an overnight bag, the logic had already settled into place. Distance would restore perspective. Familiarity would recalibrate his internal baseline. Home was familiar. The highway thinned as buildings gave way to fields, then to the low clusters of houses that marked the edge of his childhood town. Leon rolled down the window despite the chill, letting the clean, unremarkable air replace the city's constant hum. Nothing had changed. That was the problem. Leon parked in front of his parents' house just after 8. The lawn was trimmed with methodical care. The porch light was still on, unnecessary in the growing daylight. His mother opened the door before he knocked. "Leon?" she said, surprised and pleased all at once. "You didn't say you were coming." "I didn't know I was," he replied. She hugged him anyway, tight and brief. "You hungry?" "Yes," Leon said. "Always." His father looked up from the table when they entered the kitchen. "Morning," he said. "Car still running?" Leon shook his head. "I'm staying." His father grunted approval. That was as close as he got to enthusiasm. Breakfast unfolded predictably. Eggs, toast, the same brand of coffee Leon remembered from childhood. Conversation stayed light. Weather, work. His mother asked questions designed to gather information without prying. Eventually, inevitably, she asked, "Anyone special?" Leon paused, fork halfway to his mouth. "No," he said. She nodded, accepting the answer without comment. That bothered him more than if she'd pushed. After breakfast, Leon walked the neighborhood. The streets were narrower than he remembered, the houses closer together. He passed the park where he'd learned to ride a bike, the corner store that had closed a decade ago. This was where his worldview had been shaped, not by theory, but by observation. He'd watched people settle early, stay too long, and mistake endurance for virtue. He'd learned that love, once promised, became obligation. Stability, he'd decided, was something you built alone. On the edge of town, Leon stopped by the old cemetery. His grandparents' headstones stood side by side, names carved deep, dates spanning nearly 50 years. They fought constantly, his mother had once said, but they never left. Leon had taken that as a warning. Standing there now, he wondered if he'd misunderstood the data. That evening, Leon sat on the back porch with his father, nursing a beer. "You're quiet," his father said. "I'm thinking." "Dangerous habit," his father replied. Leon smiled faintly. "Did you ever regret getting married?" His father considered the question seriously, which Leon appreciated. "No," he said finally, "but I regretted staying silent when I shouldn't have." Leon absorbed that. "What about risk?" Leon asked. "Did you ever feel like you were betting everything on something that might not hold?" His father snorted. "Every day. And you still did it." "Yes." "Why?" His father shrugged. "Because avoiding risk didn't feel like living, felt like hiding." Leon stared out at the yard, at the fence his father had repaired a dozen times rather than replace. Later that night, lying in his childhood bedroom, Leon admitted something he'd been circling for weeks. Mara hadn't unsettled him because she was unpredictable. She'd unsettled him because she was honest about uncertainty. And he wasn't. Leon returned to the city the next afternoon with a quiet resolve. He didn't go straight home. The bookstore bell chimed as he stepped inside. Mara looked up from the counter, surprise flashing briefly across her face before she masked it. "Leon," she said carefully. "Mara." A pause stretched between them, taut with unspoken assumptions. "I owe you an apology," Leon said. Mara folded her arms. For assuming," he said, "and for disappearing instead of clarifying." She studied him. "You heard something." "Yes." "And believed it." "Yes." She nodded. "That tracks." "I was wrong." Mara exhaled slowly. "I'm not dating anyone." Leon's shoulders loosened despite himself. "But," she added, "that's not the point." "No," Leon agreed. "The point is that I defaulted to distance when things became ambiguous." "Because ambiguity feels dangerous to you," she said. "Yes. And now," Leon met her gaze, "now I'm acknowledging that avoiding uncertainty has become its own kind of stagnation." Mara searched his face, weighing the sincerity. "You're not promising anything," she said. "No. And you're not asking me to." "No." A small smile tugged at her mouth. "Good." They stood there, the bookstore quiet around them. Leon felt the familiar urge to categorize, to predict, to protect. Instead, he did something else. He stayed. And for the first time, the uncertainty didn't feel like a threat. It felt like an opening. Chapter 7. Variable shift. Leon did not change overnight. That misconception irritated him almost as much as the people who believed personal growth arrived in cinematic moments. Grand gestures, sweeping declarations, a single decisive act that rewrote a life. Change, Leon knew, was incremental. It happened quietly, often invisibly, revealed only in hindsight by altered behavior. What changed first was not what he did. It was what he stopped avoiding. He continued going to the bookstore, not daily, not ritualistically, but often enough that it became unremarkable. Sometimes he stayed 10 minutes, sometimes an hour, sometimes he bought a book, sometimes he didn't. Mara never commented on the inconsistency. That, Leon realized, was part of the appeal. They talked without agenda. About books, yes, but also about the city, about the kinds of lives people accidentally built, about the strange pressure to want what everyone else seemed to want. "You don't talk like someone who's afraid of commitment," Mara said one evening, as they sat on stools behind the counter after closing. "You talk like someone who's afraid of misalignment." Leon considered that. "That's a distinction. And an important one." He nodded. "I don't fear closeness. I fear entrapment." Mara tapped her finger against the ledger. "I fear inertia." They sat with that for a moment, the quiet thick but not uncomfortable. "What are we doing?" Mara asked eventually, not sharply, not anxiously, just curiously. Leon didn't answer right away. He noticed, with some surprise, that he wasn't trying to optimize the response. "I don't know," he said finally, "but I know what I'm not doing. And that is, I'm not assuming this needs a predefined outcome to be valid." Mara studied him. "That sounds expensive." Leon smiled. "It is." The first real test came sooner than Leon expected. It arrived in the form of an invitation. A colleague's engagement party. Casual dress. Open bar. +1s encouraged. Leon stared at the email longer than necessary. Social events had always been manageable because expectations were clear. This one wasn't. He forwarded the invitation to Mara with a single line. "No pressure. Just information." She responded an hour later. "Information received. Question pending." They met that evening, walking through the city as dusk settled in. "You're asking me without asking me," Mara said. "Yes," Leon admitted. "And you're okay if I say no." "Yes. And you won't reinterpret that as rejection." Leon paused. "Then honestly, I'll feel it, but I won't punish you for it." Mara smiled slowly. "That's new." "For me," Leon agreed. She stopped walking, turning to face him. "Okay, I'll go." Leon felt the urge to catalog the sensation that followed: relief, anticipation, fear, but he let it exist without analysis. The party itself was loud and bright and filled with people eager to celebrate a future they believed they could predict. Leon introduced Mara without qualifiers. She navigated the room easily, observant but unperformative. At one point, someone asked how long they'd been together. Leon opened his mouth. Mara answered first. "We haven't decided yet." The person laughed awkwardly and moved on. Leon looked at her. "Thank you for not letting that become something it isn't." She shrugged. "It'll become what it becomes." That sentence would have unsettled him weeks ago. Now it grounded him. Later that night, walking home, Leon felt something unfamiliar settle into place. Not certainty, but resolve. "I'm bad at promises," he said. Mara glanced at him. "I know, but I'm good at decisions." She stopped walking. "Are you making one?" Leon met her gaze. "Yes." He took a breath. "I want to choose this. Not indefinitely. Not blindly. Just deliberately." Mara's expression softened. Not into relief, but recognition. "I can work with deliberate," she said. Leon nodded. "So can I." They didn't seal it with declarations or labels. They didn't rush to define the shape of what they were building. They simply continued. Eyes open, assumptions checked, momentum intact. And for the first time in Leon Murdock's carefully managed life, forward motion wasn't something to control. It was something he chose. Chapter 8. The bet. Leon had always believed that commitment was a finish line. You dated, evaluated, optimized, and if the metrics aligned, you crossed into something formal. Marriage. Permanence. A contract designed to lock variables in place. What he was discovering now was far more unsettling. Commitment wasn't an ending. It was an ongoing decision. That realization followed him through the following weeks, weaving itself into moments both ordinary and quietly profound. Grocery shopping became a shared negotiation. Evenings blurred into long conversations that wandered without agenda. Mara began leaving the bookstore earlier some nights, and Leon learned the precise difference between closing and closing with intention. They did not move in together. They did not label themselves. They did not make promises designed to soothe anxiety. They did something harder. They paid attention. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday that gave no warning it would matter. They were in Leon's apartment, shoes by the door, takeout containers open on the coffee table. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The city felt distant, reduced to a glow and a murmur. Mara leaned back against the couch. "Can I ask you something without you trying to solve it?" Leon smiled faintly. "I'll try. Try harder." "I will listen," he said deliberately. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Do you see this going somewhere?" Leon didn't answer immediately. He noticed, with a strange sense of pride, that his first instinct wasn't to deflect. "Yes," he said. Mara's expression didn't change. "Define somewhere." "I don't know yet," Leon said. "But forward. Intentionally. Not passively." "That's not a guarantee." "No," Leon agreed. "It's not." She exhaled slowly. "I need to know that if this gets hard, you won't retreat into silence." Leon felt the weight of that. He didn't rush it. "I can't promise I won't feel the urge," he said. "But I can promise I'll say it out loud when I do." Mara nodded. "That's all I'm asking." Silence settled again. Not tense. Not heavy. Just honest. Leon realized something then. Something that would have terrified him months ago. This was the risk. Not marriage. Not paperwork. Not permanence. Visibility. He reached for Mara's hand, not as a gesture, but as a decision. "I don't believe in fairy tales," he said. "But I do believe in choosing well-informed risk over guaranteed stagnation." Mara smiled softly. "That's the least romantic thing anyone's ever said to me." Leon smiled back. And yet, she echoed. The engagement party photos showed up on Leon's social feed a few days later. Smiling faces, champagne flutes, captions filled with certainty. Leon didn't feel envy. He felt clarity. He wasn't avoiding commitment. He was redefining it. Later that night, lying beside Mara in the quiet dark, Leon stared at the ceiling and allowed himself a thought he'd never permitted before. Marriage wasn't the bet. Avoiding connection had been. And this slow, deliberate choosing wasn't reckless. It was reasoned. For the first time, Leon Murdock wasn't standing on the sidelines of his own life, calculating probabilities while the moment passed him by. He was in it, eyes open, hands steady, making the bet, not on permanence, not on certainty, but on presence.